Standard operating procedures is a phrase that has been obsolete in the last 18 months. And that is due to the ever changing market that we are conducting business in. And on this episode, we focus on the changes and the creativity it took to navigate these unprecedented times. And more importantly, how we use that information and creativity moving forward. As together, we are building the future. This is the Building the Future podcast. I am your host, the lumberjack, Brett Thorne. On this show, we explore topics including construction, building materials, real estate, remodeling, the housing market, industry news, new products and trends, technology, government, everything you need for building the future. This is the Building the Future podcast, and I am your host, Brett Thorne. And today it's a pleasure to welcome back with me Ruth Kellick-Grubbs.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And Ruth, let's see, it was about this time last year, October of 2020, when we first connected. And for any listeners out there that would like to find out a little bit more about Ruth and kind of how she got into this industry and a little bit of her background, you can go check out episode number 19. But for today, Ruth, I really got to start off. I want to share a fun story with you, or at least I think it was fun.
Okay.
In the past year, on one of the dealer panels I participated in, a fellow panelist, when he was responding to one of the questions, I heard him quote the phrase, creativity before capital. And I knew immediately that was Ruth Kellick-Grubbs there. So when the session got over, I connected with him and I asked him, I said, okay, I got to ask, do you know Ruth Kellick-Grubbs? And I apologize, I do not remember who it was, but absolutely. So Ruth, I can say with 100% confidence, you are leaving a positive impression on this industry.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I certainly hope that's the case, but there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good work out there.
And that's really the topic I at least want to start our conversation with today. One of the reasons that I really want to dive into that is because with everything that we have faced in business in the last 12 to 18 months, creativity was a requirement. I mean, because the entire business model changed for anybody that was deemed essential, anybody that had their doors open, anybody that was still putting product out there. You had to be creative about how you did it simply because of all the regulations and everything that was going on. So I think this is a great time to really start to evaluate that as businesses are looking at moving forward and decide, do we go with this creativity? Do we look at capital? How do we continue business from here forward? So I think a great point to start at would be, why don't you kind of give us your background and your reasoning behind the creativity before capital idea?
Sure, thanks. So creativity before capital it's a way of thinking about things, and it's firmly rooted in lean methodologies, whether it's lean manufacturing, lean thinking, lean systems. And I did a lot of work in that area before entering this industry. And when we look at what we're doing, there's always the question of how do we make it easier for customers, and then how do we make it easier for ourselves, and can we take some steps out of the process. And it's really kind of easy sometimes to throw money at a challenge. And certainly last year, we didn't have an opportunity, I think universally across the country in our industry, especially, but I think most industries, everyone's grappling with not having enough people. And so trying to figure out how to get the work done with fewer resources. And we'd love to throw money and hire somebody. We can't. So it's really forcing the creativity before capital. But it's always I think it's always a good management, philosophy to approach everything with. With the resources we have, could we do it differently? Could we organize it differently? Could we sequence it differently and come up with the same or a better result? So that's kind of the the gist of what we do around creativity before capital, and just looking at how do we get a company from A to B, and can we do it with what they have today.
Okay. So once you've established the creativity before capital, and like you said, figured out ways to do it just as good, if not better, without investing the capital, do you have to then take it there to the next step and say, okay, because obviously there's going to be an expense to everything. The capital expense, oftentimes it's well defined because maybe it's a new piece of equipment or maybe it's a new
Mm-hmm.
employee, and you can look and see the dollar value that it's going to cost for that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the creativity might be a little tougher to put a dollar figure to. So do you try to maybe balance those out, or at least try to get them on equal terms? You say, okay, our creativity is costing us X. So when creativity gets to a level that is a percentage of capital or maybe a multiple of capital, do you then say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, now we need to invest in the capital? And do you put a time frame on that? How do you weigh those out as you move forward with the concept of
Mm-hmm.
creativity?
That's a great question, because there's an innate almost frugalness to our industry. We generally try to figure out how to do things on our own, and um, we've approached the business, and we have equipment, and we run it for a long time, and so this industry kind of has that sort of baked in of, let me be a little bit more thrifty. As one of my customers will say, thrifty but classy. So
Ooh, I like
there's that's a good
that.
one. Yeah. So there's definitely a trade-off, and at some point, going to duct tape and baling twine only gets you so far. There's so much that we can do. And so you're right. At some point, we do need to make an investment. And this is where I think some companies would get a benefit. They focus a little bit more. We got to measure performance. And a lot of people don't measure, or they don't measure maybe some key things that would be really useful for them to know.
Can you give us a few of those keys that people don't know that they should be knowing?
Well, first off is OTIF, right? On time and in full. We've got an industry of people who are really good at it, and they know they're good at it, and they think that they don't have to measure it. And um, I would say that that's a dangerous assumption to make. So OTIF would be a good one. The other piece of this, and OTIF is my first one because it's a measure of customer value. Back to looking at where do we make investments, and we've got limited resources. So what out of many opportunities do we choose to actually put dollars into, or human capital into? And so when we've got multiple options, how do we make that choice? And so having the data and some information around customer value and being focused on, is this something that's really going to be important to a customer and make it easier for them and easier for us? I think those are good yardsticks. So OTIF would be my first data point that I'd want. But I'd also want good data points around, it's just productivity and efficiencies in different processes. So sales per employee, gross profit per employee, delivered sales per truck, delivered gross profit per truck. I think some of the holy grail. The other one I would definitely add to that list is what I call IRA, which is an inventory record accuracy. So we measure inventory in dollars, and we're pretty good at that, but we don't necessarily measure it as well once the dollars turn into product. So inventory record accuracy, if you're doing cycle counts, if I'm a salesperson, it gives me 100% confidence that what my system says is what I have and it's sellable. And that when the ticket gets to the dispatch office and they're going to go pull it, they can see that they need X amount. We've got plenty to fulfill that order, and we know exactly where it is, the location in the yard. So inventory record accuracy measures, do we have the right stuff in the right place, and is it in the right condition? So those are some of the ones that I think are really fundamental and super important and powerful for helping a company improve. And when we talk about leveraging, whether we're going to hire more people, whether we're going to invest in another Moffett truck, having that information really makes it easier to make a sound business decision on where I want to invest my dollars and or people.
Okay, so and I would agree with you. Going through that list of things, those are probably not some of the key things that a lot of people you hear about when people are talking about their business metrics and stuff. So for those that maybe want to look at starting to measure those,
Mm-hmm.
How do they get a comparative to see, okay, we're measuring it now, but what does that number stack up against? How do they get a benchmark of where those numbers should be?
There's a couple ways that they could get benchmarks. There's a lot of the state and regional associations sponsor roundtables. We do a number of those. You could participate in those and be able to benchmark within your roundtable group and then get some data that's regional and national comparison. Obviously, we've got a lot of benchmark data for our clients as well. That's another way to do it. But maybe the state associations can have some access or have some data that they could share as well. And that's important. There's just such a trap of being that false sense of security of we're really good at this. But are we better than our competition? Are we the same? Or are we have some ground to cover to catch up to them? And knowing that's really important for how we go about operating the business on a daily basis. So having that's important, the context, but the most important metric is always your own. And can you improve on your past performance? So this is where we're at. Can we improve it by 10%? Can we improve it by 15? And then just, cover the ground, get things tighter and more efficient, and on you go.
There's so many people that do. I mean, they look at sales, they look at margin, they look at expenses, and they look at net, and that's it. They don't.
Mhm.
I mean, they really don't start to peel the layers apart
Mhm.
and say, okay, what are we really doing? I mean, there's two sides of that. Number one,
Mhm.
you need to understand what you're really doing, but then you also need to understand where you are compared to where you need to be. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great to know where you are. That's the first step. You always have to know that, and you have to be able, like you said, see how you're trending over the years. But then you also say, okay, you may think you're doing great, but
But
when
am
you look at
I?
industry average, yeah, you may be doing horrible.
So one note on industry averages, at least you've got some context of where you fit in the field. But I would put this note out there. Most of the industry average performance metrics, they're never anything I would have a client shoot for. Their target should be substantially higher than those in almost every case. So when we look at industry averages, it's good to know. Um, but I would say that that bar is quite low and that our target performances are always going to be higher and in many cases substantially higher.
Truly, when you put it in that kind of context, I mean, the industry average, I mean, that's 50%. That's just the midway mark. So if you're at the industry average, I mean,
Yeah.
you're not doing poor, but you're not doing great
Yeah.
either.
Like if we looked at industry average on delivered sales per truck, for example, we do a ton of work on distribution and we see this and we look at it all day long. And that industry average is generally like around $1 million per truck. Often it's below $1 million per truck. And this is an industry that likes equipment. That's great. We've got equipment, we run it. Okay. But that target, back to capacity utilization and really creating efficiencies, I'm hard pressed to find an organization where I wouldn't say that their target, if they're retail, maybe their target is 2 million. If they're a pro yard, there isn't anybody out there who should be doing less than 2.5 per truck. And the industry average is a million. So that's what I mean. Like when we talk about it's good to know where you are, but in some cases, the industry average really isn't the benchmark to shoot for.
Okay. So let me ask you then, should we be looking at a different benchmark, maybe like the top 20, top 30% of
Hmm.
producers? Is that kind of maybe where you should really be aiming
Yeah,
towards?
exactly. And that data is a little bit harder to find, but it's
I can
knowable.
imagine.
Yeah, if somebody wants to know where they stack up, tell them to call me and I'll tell them.
So this is one of the services you guys offer at Kellick and Associates, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we focus on helping companies improve and getting from A to B, and we do a lot of work on the profitability, productivity, efficiencies to drive a financial performance. And there's a lot that we all know goes into making that happen. So we do work on operations, on sales. We do work on people management structure, what drives that performance. And obviously, one of the big things lately has just been people and the competition that we have for people and trying to be an employer of choice. A lot of rural markets that haven't had to compete so much before net might now have a Walmart or Amazon distribution center. they're paying 18 to 20, 25 bucks an hour. Their drivers are getting more than that. I know in Pennsylvania, there was one Walmart distribution center, and they were paying a bonus during sort of a peak season of a 4-week period. And you got an extra $250 per week if you just showed up on time and didn't call out. So over the month, they got an extra $1,000 if they just came to work when they were scheduled. Yeah, I know. That's the state of the employment market.
Wow.
Right.
I hope none of my employees listen to this show.
It's crazy. So when you look at the competition that we have to be an employer and trying to attract talent, there's been a lot more emphasis and attention on, how do we become an employer of choice? And so we do a lot of work on that too. And when you look at if we're going to deliver customer value, we really need to deliver employee value first. And, employees that are engaged and happy deliver a higher experience for any of our customers or vendor partners for that matter. So when we look at that, you see more companies in our industry that are focused on the best places to work. And those are great. And it's great to have the recognition. But the really important piece of all of that is that you get the data back on what employees think about the business and what's impacting them. And you really get the answers to the test on what you need to work on to really improve the employee experience so that you can continue to improve the customer experience and drive the business forward. So there's a lot of opportunity around that.
Setting the financial part of the employment aside, where are the biggest stumbling blocks that you see in our industry for recruiting people or enticing people to come and work in this industry?
I think most people just don't know us. When you think about, I'm going to get a job, unless it's in your family or somebody in your family is involved in the buildings industry in some way, I just don't think people think of us. And once we get people in the door, we're pretty good at keeping them. It's a great place to work, great people. So I think that's our first thing. And then, we're just not that, we're not that attractive. We're often not that flexible. Everybody had to pivot. To your point, people were really creative last year, and we had a lot of people work from home, but so much of what we do, you can't work from home. And the conversation, I'd say the last few months, just about some of the lessons learned. And it's interesting because some folks are saying, yeah, we're going to continue with work from home in some positions. And others are really adamant about, we're not doing that. Like, there's no way anybody here is going to work from home. And one of the things that we know that a lot of the workforce is valuing is some flexibility, whether it's work from home one day a week or a couple of days, or, can I get out early to go to my kid's softball game or something? And I think sometimes we're not flexible and adaptable, our industry. I think we've got this last year that changes that a lot. I think we've been super adaptable and have turned the corner perhaps on that piece of it. But the workforce today is a challenge. There's no doubt, and expectations of what my work is and what kind of communication and tools I have to do the job. And that's probably the other big piece that's a hurdle for us to get over is we don't have a lot of current technology to do the job that we're asking our employees to do. Just for example, this is rare in our industry. It's out there. There's dealers that do this, but there's not very many. If I'm working in the yard at a LBM dealer and the counter calls out on the radio and says, Ruth, customers going to warehouse 2 to pick up XYZ. Counter gets frustrated because I don't answer because I'm already helping somebody else and, my hands are full, and I call back, or I call back into the office because they don't have any. I can't find it. We don't have enough of it to fill the order. But I call back into the counter and nobody picks up the radio. So there's so much frustration around this. Like, what other business does this happen in? Like, you can walk into almost any other business, and if I'm going to get something out of the warehouse, let's say Tractor Supply, you're going to go pick up something that's outside. They know what it is. And if they don't, they've got a device that tells them what the inventory level is, where it's supposed to be. And if they don't have it, what other store does. So there's a lot of frustration we put our teams through because we don't have some of the tools that are really kind of considered basic in a lot of other industries. I think that makes us less attractive as an employer sometimes too.
As you were going through that, I was kind of thinking, especially on the piece of flexibility, and I was I was trying to think of a scenario of a similar business model, because for our business, we're retail, we have set hours, and when those doors are open, you got to have people there. And that
Mhm,
does
mhm,
create a flexibility conflict at times, because you look at some other industries, tech industries and stuff, to where it's all project oriented, it's not time oriented.
mhm.
I do like how you mentioned Tractor Supply, because that's another business model to be very similar to ours. How do they get around the flexibility piece?
I think it's a little bit of a page from the grocery store. You don't staff a grocery store for the 5 o'clock rush, but at that 5 o'clock rush, everybody goes to the front of the house to handle everyone stopping to pick up something on their way home from work. And so there's a little bit of that. One of the options or tools that we might have that we don't see used a lot in our industry is a 4 10-hour day, a 4-day work week,
Mm-hmm.
where that can build in some flexibility. Because you're right, we have to have people to do, and we've got to be, responsive to what our customers need when they need it. So there's definitely a lot of staggered schedules we can do that help cover some peak periods. But a 4-day work week, a lot of people like that. And that's not something a lot of lumber dealers embrace today, but I think that's something we'll see more of, because that's one way to solve the flexibility issue.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the 3 days off that they really like.
Yeah, not everybody like might have 3 days in a row off, but they'll have 2 days and one in the middle of the week, and a lot of things that you can do at that time. So that's assuming a 40-hour work week. And this is something other. So this is back to the creativity before capital. How do we do the work and not have people work crazy numbers of hours? And then that leads to the other question. Well, I'm paying them overtime and they like it. And, if they weren't going to work overtime, they'd make a lot less and it's not enough to live on. So set that aside for just a second.
Okay.
But let's just talk about the hours. You know, a standard schedule for operations staff in a lot of lumber yards could be 48 hours. It could be 52. And that's the standard. That's what they work every week. That's just how the schedules are made. So what if we only work 40 hours? And would that appeal to more employees? There's such a different perspective on work from younger generations versus older generations. And I imagine that in your family business, there are prior generations that basically, if you're not working 70 hours a week, you're not working. And there's still some of that expectation in our business, but we've got a lot of employees that just aren't interested in that. They want to have a little bit more balance and things to, time for things outside of work. So if we can put work back in the box, what's that do for us? And do we become more attractive? And do we have a bigger pool of people to draw from? And I think what we've seen with this is the answer to that is a resounding yes. Then you have the question or the challenge of, well, we're not paying enough for somebody to live on 40 hours a week without overtime. And then it becomes the challenge of how do we pay people more and have them work less? And that transition is a little bit tricky, but it's doable. And there are companies in our industry that have gotten that done. And work always expands to the time available. So let's just put some guardrails out there and let's figure out how to do it in 40 hours, whether it's a 4-day work week or a 5-day work week or 5.5-day work week, or 5 or 6. And I know some people with the retail might be 7-day work week, and that's another ball of wax there too. But can we get it done in 40 hours and give people a little bit more balance? So those are the creativity before capital challenges I think a lot of our industry has in front of them. And there's ways to solve for that. And that's the kind of fun and cool things, because once you do, and the momentum that creates, there's just such a springboard to go and do some other really cool, great things for the business that benefits your people, your team, and your customers as well.
I would agree with you 100% that those are some big challenges, but I think that those need to be addressed. I mean, you are hitting everything spot on with the challenges our industry faces to
Mhm,
go forward, and I think to really be competitive on a economic standing, to draw good talent, we are gonna
mhm,
have to figure out some new ways of doing things. That
mhm,
work-life balance, like you mentioned,
mhm,
with the younger generations, that's very important to them. The pay based off of productivity, I think, is very critical. I love how you mentioned people tend to fill the hours that they've got. I mean, they take the work and they'll fill the hours. Can I agree with you 100% on that? What about, and I hear a lot more, and I think this pandemic has kind of maybe sparked a little bit of the gig economy.
Mhm.
Is there ways to utilize the gig economy a little bit in our industry to maybe get some of those duties off of the plates of our core employees so they can now focus back on what it is they do best? Is that anything you've explored or had any of your clients explore?
And kind of with the what I would tell like what I would say the usual suspects. We see that a lot for marketing, social media management, hiring recruiters. Maybe the recruiter doesn't work for us full time, but maybe they work for us 3 days a week or something like that, sort of you know, and they do whatever else they do. Um, I think there's opportunities around that for us. There's a challenge, right? Because of the relationship component. So when we talk about gig economy, this might be a little bit different than what you're thinking, but I see more lumber dealers that have remote workers that are inside sales coordinators, that are truss designers, estimators, um, and they might live in the same town, they might live halfway around the country, but that there's the connectivity that we've got electronically has opened some opportunities to do things a little bit differently. That's not necessarily peeling off and letting the team that we have that's customer facing do what they do best, but in some cases it might support that. That's something to, I guess, dig in a little bit more and say, what else could we do? Back to the creativity piece. Could we leverage that more? I'm sure there's ways that we could.
Another point you brought up was the technology piece. And I don't think it's any secret that our industry has been well behind the technology curve for years. I will say that this pandemic has forced our hand to become a little
Mhm.
bit better. We're now in the 21st century, I think. We're using Zoom. We're just like you and I are
Woo.
here. Uh, but what are some key technology things that our industry is not utilizing that should be?
That's a great question. And I think this goes right back to the heart of customer value and expectations and also employees. How do we want to work? So if you buy anything on the internet today, you get a confirmation, you get a hey, it's shipped, and you get hey, here's a tracking. Here's when it's going to be delivered. That's kind of the ante to get into the game, right? Like that's table stakes. So that's something that's not table stakes for our industry yet. So the advanced ship notification, an automated special order notification when a special order comes in, and that's such a big part of the LBM business today. Most independents are doing 30-40% of their business as special orders. Having something in my hand, if I'm working in the yard, that connects me in live real time to our inventory, and our inventory is really tight and on it, right? So that I know when somebody comes out and is looking to fill the order and they can show me their ticket, I know where to go, I know how many we have, and I know that they're going to be sellable. Let me answer the question in real time with the customer. Don't make me have to radio back. So all of these things, right? It's making my job easier. It's definitely more efficient. What's the radio? Just the phone traffic through the dispatch office, and how much of that phone traffic in any dispatch office is, hey, where's my order? There's no value added to that we can't do with an electronic communication. So those are the things I think from, again, like what do we do that a customer is willing to pay us for? And what do they want? And how do we make their life easier? That's a minimum customer expectation. So those are the things I think are the biggest opportunities. And, that technology is out there, available. We might need a little bit of work to turn it on and fine tune it, but I mean that's a big first step for a lot of companies.
One thing I'm starting to see a lot more of, and more in the construction side of our industry,
Mhm.
is your project management
Mhm.
programs and stuff out there. You're starting to see a lot of apps come out. Matter of fact, I just saw recently that Level Set just bought Procore, or
Mhm.
acquired Procore, and they are a job site management system. They have a lot of other tools as well. From the industry standpoint, how are we doing with that as far as customer relations and customer management?
Yeah, that's customer driven to some extent, but
Hmm.
look at BFS and their purchase of Paradigm. Paradigm's like 75% of the market. I mean, most LBM dealers are using Paradigm. And then they went out and bought, I think it was Apollo. And you look at the technology investment that BFS has made, they're kind of backing into offsite. They've already got the modular components, and it doesn't take much of a crystal ball to look down the road and say how we build is changing or going to change. If nothing else, it's going to happen because we've got labor challenges, and that's going to drive. And we have always seen this: when labor gets tight, components get a lot more popular, and we see a lot more activity there. But then labor's cheap and it's available, and so we see less of that. But we don't have the skilled labor, and I think that this time it's significantly different than it's been in the past. Like, we're really going to have some long-term lasting change from this. And the technology is kind of that tipping point, because the technology is enabling that change. So whether somebody is going to, partner up or get proficient and do things with Procore, we've got to be able to digitize everything that we do and make that, whatever platform we're using, be able to communicate with some others. It, BFS is not in every market for everybody around the country, but for those that do have BFS in their market, like, that's a throwdown on the technology side. And it's a challenge because it's expensive. It's an expensive thing. And so I think for an independent on the technology side, it's really important to stay focused on customer value. What's a customer want? What do they need? What are they willing to pay us for? Because those aren't always the same thing. They say they like these things, but they're not going to pay for it, right? So I would ask those three questions and make sure that any investments I make are going to be geared toward, hopefully, something that meets all three of those criteria for a customer. But there's definitely some investment coming up, which kind of goes back to, we've been fortunate. We've had inflation, product inflation, that's really benefited the sales and gross profit. So people should be making a lot of money this year, a lot. And that money is needed to invest in the business. And a lot of it's probably should go towards technology. That's a hill to climb.
Yeah, and in this industry, it may even be more of a peak, maybe a little bit bigger than a hill.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I like that you mentioned the BSF acquisition, because I remember when I read about that, the first thing that came to my mind is, you look at the big tech companies. Now, obviously, this has nothing to do with our industry, but you look at the Google, Facebook,
Mhm.
Amazon, and to them, data is king.
Mhm.
Data is the new commodity to them. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what they want. They want that data. And that's what makes them so powerful, is because they know what the consumer wants, maybe before the consumer knows it, just because they haven't consciously thought about it. But they're tracking everything they're looking at, they're
Mhm.
scrolling through. That's where all that
Mhm.
data is. And when I first read about that acquisition, which was a huge acquisition and what they paid, I thought,
Mhm.
these guys are getting into the data game. That's exactly what they're doing. They're getting those users' data.
Mhm.
They're having a
Yeah.
better understanding of their customer.
I feel like it's reverse engineering Katera. Katera made this big splash. We've got all this data. We're going to go out and build this way. And the data is going to enable us to do that. The technology is going to enable us to do that. BFS has got all the component plants. I mean, combine BFS and BMC, and their ability to turn out components is unprecedented or unrivaled. And so they've already got the manufacturing pieces. They've got automated plants. So adding and layering this technology piece, they're kind of backing into Katera like capabilities without that crazy investment that Katera made.
Yeah.
It's not the same, but it's on that path, right? And so it's, to me, that's what it looks like. That they're definitely positioning for the future. And even on the retail side, you look at all the investment that Home Depot and now Lowe's have made on technology and being easy to do business with, and they've both refocused their emphasis on pro business. And so it's easy to get overwhelmed. I think it's something that's outside the wheelhouse for most of us in our industry. It's something that's expensive and big and a little daunting. And I think as long as we stay grounded, right? Customer value, who's our customer? What do they want? What do they need? What are they going to pay for? Then, we just take it one step at a time, one bite at a time, and figure out where we need to make that investment. And There's groups of dealers that have banded together to try to create technology solutions that they can leverage collectively. I think we'll see more of that because generally speaking, it's probably a big financial nut. And, could a group of people in non-competing areas create a technology that they can all leverage in their market? Sure. So I think we'll see some more collaboration like that just by the nature of the size of the investment.
And Ruth, I want to be respectful of your time today. Before I let you go, if you had any words of wisdom or closing thoughts for the listeners, what would that be?
Operators in the industry today are really good at what they do. They're really good and they're doing a great job. And I feel like the landscape is moving quickly. And within that, if I was going to offer advice, it'd be presumptuous to do that. Measure the key performance areas that matter for employee value and customer value, and just keep the focus on those two things, and the rest sort of takes care of itself. But ask the questions. Sometimes we assume what our customers want or what our employees want, and it never goes well when we skip that step. We should just ask. Like, this is a knowable thing, so take the time and ask, and then just listen, figure out how to make it happen. The rest of it's gravy.
And if listeners would like to get in contact with you to find out more about Kellick and Associates and the services you offer, what is the best way to do that, Ruth?
Kellickandassociates.com. It's all spelled out. So KELLICKANDASSOCIATES.com.
And I will put that in the show notes. Ruth, I want to thank you again for taking time to share with myself and the listeners today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
This is the Building the Future podcast. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Please like and share. You can find out more at our website, www.buildingthefuturepodcast.com. Together we are building the future.